Long before signatures and courts, commerce depended on a hidden code. This is the story of the unwritten agreements that united early merchants. By the end, you will see every modern transaction in a completely new light. How could a simple handshake be more binding than a legal document? What secret language allowed strangers to trade fortunes without sharing a single word? The answer lies in a forgotten world of sacred oaths and silent promises. What do you think is the true foundation of trust between strangers? Sunlight would first touch the dust of 1,000 converging paths, a world where a trader from Chang'an had no common law with a caravan master from Samarkand. There were no universal courts, no extradition treaties, just the endless, whispering expanse between empires. In that void, the only true currency was predictability. A merchant facing a sandstorm in the Taklamakan Desert, or navigating the crowded wharves of an Indus Valley port, could not appeal to a distant king's justice. The risk was total. Every journey was a gamble where the stakes were not just silk or spices, but survival itself. This raw necessity became the anvil upon which trust was hammered out. Anthropologists point out something profound. Trade networks often emerged before the states that claimed to govern them. Commerce did not wait for permission, it built the road first. What this means is that the marketplace, that chaotic intersection of strangers, became a laboratory for human cooperation. The need for a deal to be honored tomorrow, or in 6 moons when the caravans met again, created a powerful, silent pressure. It fostered a code where your reputation was your most valuable cargo, more precious than any gemstone. Out of sheer mutual need, a simple, powerful principle took root. The idea that for this system to work at all, reciprocity had to be reliable. This was the fertile ground prepared by peril and opportunity, where the seeds of unwritten agreements could grow into something astonishingly complex. Into this landscape of fragile trust, a powerful force stepped forward to lend its weight, the divine. The most unbreakable contracts of the ancient world were not written on clay, but sworn in the presence of gods. In the bustling markets of Mesopotamia, a merchant sealing a deal for grain or copper would raise a hand and invoke Shamash, the sun god and ultimate divine judge. This was more than ceremony. An oath transformed a simple bargain into a spiritual compact with cosmic consequences for its breach. To break your word was not merely to cheat a business partner, it was to defy a deity, inviting a retribution no human court could match. Commerce was thus lifted from the dusty ground of the marketplace and placed under the watchful eyes of heaven, weaving honesty directly into the fabric of religious duty. Centuries later, the Greek traveler Herodotus recorded how Phoenician merchants, masters of the Mediterranean, would make solemn vows upon the restless sea itself. They believed the gods of the deep winds and currents would personally punish any deception. This fusion of faith and trade created a deterrent of immense power. A merchant's concern was no longer just about losing a future deal, but about risking divine disfavor that could follow them beyond this life. In a world without international law, the fear of a god's wrath became a universal enforcement mechanism, a celestial guarantee that reached across every border and sea. Faith, in this unexpected way, became humanity's first truly global standard for business integrity. It provided a common language of consequence where none had existed, binding strangers not just to each other, but to a higher order they both believed was watching. But trust built on faith still needed a handhold in the physical world, a way to make the invisible promise visible. This is where commerce developed its own silent vocabulary, a language spoken not with words but with objects. In the bustling ports and caravan stops, where a dozen different tongues might clash in the air, a merchant's most reliable translator was often a simple piece of clay. A uniquely carved seal, pressed into a damp tablet or onto the lump of clay securing a jar, became a universal statement. That impression was far more than a signature. It was a portable reputation, a condensed story of origin and quality that anyone could see, even if they could not read a single glyph. It whispered, "This comes from my house and I stand behind it." The system grew astonishingly sophisticated. Consider the Mesopotamian bulla, a hollow clay ball no larger than a fist. Inside, a trader would place small, distinct clay tokens, each shape representing a specific quantity and type of good: 10 sheep, 5 jars of oil. He would then seal the ball shut with his personal mark. This object was a primitive but brilliant bill of lading and contract all in one. To verify the shipment, the recipient would simply break the clay shell and match the tokens inside to the goods delivered. The unbroken seal was the guarantee, the physical integrity of the sphere proving the agreement had not been tampered with. It was mathematics and law rendered in baked earth. Beyond seals and tokens, the symbolism could become deeply personal, attaching the weight of human connection to a commercial bond. Across the ancient Mediterranean, a practice known as hospitality tokens, or tessera hospitalis, turned broken objects into lifelong contracts. Two parties forming an alliance would take a piece of pottery or a small sculpture and break it in two. Each kept a half. Years later, or when their descendants met, the matching pieces would prove the old pact, the fractured edges fitting together perfectly to restore the whole. The object itself was worthless, but its meaning was priceless, a physical key to a stored promise. In even more direct gestures, we see the concept of hostage giving, though not in the grim sense we might imagine today. To guarantee the return of a merchant or the fulfillment of a distant deal, a family might offer a son not as a prisoner, but as a guest and living pledge of good faith. Alternatively, a sacred artifact or a valued heirloom would be left behind. These were not acts of coercion, but powerful demonstrations of commitment. The symbolic value of the person or object left behind made the promise tangible, raising the stakes of betrayal to an unbearable personal and spiritual cost. Through tokens, seals, and symbolic pledges, abstract trust was given a body. It could be held in the hand, examined, and stored. This was the genius of early commerce. It built a bridge of understanding across any divide using the simplest, most profound materials, a shared need for certainty, and the human instinct to make a promise real. Yet the most resilient safety net for a far-roving merchant was not a law, but a form of artificial kinship. Across the wine-dark sea of the ancient Mediterranean, a lone trader arriving at a foreign shore faced immediate peril, a stranger with no rights, no allies, and no recourse. The solution was a ritual so profound it could turn an enemy into a brother. This was Xenia, the sacred bond of guest friendship. Far more than simple hospitality, Xenia was a lifelong, hereditary pact of mutual obligation, sworn under the watchful authority of Zeus, the protector of guests. It began with a formal ritual, the breaking of bread, the sharing of wine, and most crucially, the exchange of specific, meaningful gifts. A host might present a finely wrought cup, while the guest offered a cloak from his homeland. These were not bribes or payments, but physical tokens of the bond itself, tangible proof of a relationship now woven into the social and divine order. For a merchant, securing a Xenia bond in a distant port was the ultimate business advantage. His host became his legal protector, his guide through local customs, his guarantor in disputes, and his trusted trading agent. The host's home transformed into a de facto trade embassy, a safe house where deals could be negotiated under a sacred trust. The rules were clear and enforced by divine terror. A host must provide food, shelter, and security, and see his guest safely on his journey. The guest, in turn, must show respect, not overstay his welcome, and one day reciprocate the favor, either directly or to his host's descendants. This created self-perpetuating networks where the son of a Corinthian merchant could arrive in Crete and be welcomed as family because of a pact his father made decades before. To violate Xenia was not merely bad manners, it was an offense against the king of the gods, inviting a curse that could unravel a family's fortune for generations. This system demonstrates the incredible ingenuity of early commerce. It could not rely on paperwork, so it wove economic necessity into the very fabric of social and religious life. By transforming a business contact into a pseudo-family member bound by sacred duty, merchants built a global web of trust that no king's decree could ever hope to replicate. The marketplace was not just a location, it was a relationship consecrated by ritual and sealed with a gift. The most profound test of this unwritten code was not in the marketplace, but in the emptiness between them. On the Silk Road, where a single misstep could mean vanishing into the dunes, or in the vast silence of the Sahara, a caravan was more than a traveling market. It was a floating city bound by a brutal, beautiful logic, a social contract written not on parchment, but in the shared rhythm of footsteps and the collective intake of breath under a scorching sun. Here, survival was a group project. The wealthiest silk merchant and the camel driver tending to the pack animals were linked by a chain of mutual dependence. If the driver failed, the merchant's goods never reached their destination. If the merchant made a fatal error in navigation, the driver perished with him. This reality forged a hierarchy based not on social class but on competence and experience. The caravan master, often a figure who had survived a dozen such journeys, held absolute authority. His word on when to move, when to rest, and which perilous mountain pass to attempt was law, because his judgment was the distilled wisdom of past survival. This collective pact extended to the most vital resources. In the deep desert, a waterskin was not private property, it was a shared lifeline. The unwritten rule was stark and simple. In a crisis, allocation was based on need, not wealth. A merchant could not buy his way to an extra ration if it meant a laborer would succumb to thirst. This principle of shared scarcity transformed the caravan into a single organism. Its strength was not the sum of its individuals but their cohesion. The code enforced this solidarity with severe, immediate consequences. To hoard food or water, or to abandon a fellow traveler whose animal had fallen, was not just a moral failure, it was a direct threat to the entire group's viability. Punishment could be swift, from complete ostracization, leaving one utterly alone in the wilderness, to more severe sanctions decided by the group. This cultivated a fierce, practical loyalty. You protected the person next to you not out of abstract virtue, but because their survival increased your own odds. The commerce, the silks and spices, could only flow if the human chain carrying them remained unbroken. In the crucible of the desert, the highest form of business ethics was simply this: remember that your fate is woven to the fate of everyone on the trail. A merchant's good name was not just a pleasantry, it was the ledger where his true wealth was recorded. In the labyrinthine souks and crowded harbors, where legal contracts were often meaningless scraps, reputation became a living, breathing form of capital. It was an asset built transaction by transaction, season by season, through the consistent weight of a measure or the honest quality of a bolt of cloth. This reputation was your credit score, your letter of introduction, and your insurance policy, all woven into the stories people told about you when you were not there. A single act of deceit, like watering down wine or shaving gold from a coin's edge, could erase that capital in an instant. The consequences were not deferred to some distant court date. They were immediate and devastatingly economic. Once marked as unreliable, you found doors closing, partnerships dissolving, and your goods lingering unsold. The market had a long memory, and it traded in trust above all else. This ecosystem of reputation thrived on a powerful, informal network of communication. Gossip was not idle chatter. it was the primary news service of commerce. The evaluations of key intermediaries acted as amplifiers. The money changer, handling currency from a dozen lands, knew which merchants' coins were sound. The public scribe, drafting agreements for countless deals, witnessed who kept their word and who found excuses. The innkeeper, hosting travelers from across the trade routes, heard every story of success and betrayal. These figures became de facto credit bureaus, their quiet opinions carrying immense weight. A nod of approval from a respected moneylender could open lines of credit that no written document could secure. A warning glance from a veteran caravan master could leave a merchant without guides for his next journey. News of reliability or duplicity traveled with the caravans and sailed with the ships, often arriving in a distant port long before the merchant himself did. In the vibrant markets of the Middle East, this concept crystallized into the idea of wasta, often translated as influence or connection. But true wasta was not merely about who you knew, it was deeply rooted in who trusted you. Your influence was a direct reflection of your perceived trustworthiness. A merchant known for fair dealing built a vast network of wasta. He could secure favorable terms, resolve disputes through respected elders, and attract the most skilled partners. His word became a kind of social currency, smoothing transactions and opening opportunities. This created a beautifully self-policing community. There was no need for a centralized commercial police because every participant in the market had a vested interest in maintaining its overall integrity. A bad actor threatened the trust that made the entire system function, so the collective response was to isolate them. They were economically marginalized, cut off from the flow of deals and information that was the lifeblood of the bazaar. The punishment was not imprisonment, but irrelevance. In this way, the marketplace itself, through the collective memory and shared interests of its people, enforced the unwritten rules. It was an invisible hand, not of economics, but of communal judgment, ensuring that for commerce to flourish, a person's promise had to be as solid as the gold they traded. Perhaps the most intimate and universal ritual of all, however, required no special token or sacred oath, only a table. From the lavish Viking feasts in the great halls of the north to the precise grace of a Chinese tea ceremony, the act of sharing a meal became one of humanity's oldest and most reliable contracts. When a deal was struck, it was often sealed not with a signature but with a shared loaf of bread, a passed cup of wine, or a pinch of salt. This was far more than mere celebration. It was a profound symbolic act. By consuming the same food and drink, parties were, in a sense, incorporating a piece of each other. They were creating a temporary, powerful bond of kinship, a moment of enforced equality where merchant and buyer, host and guest sat at the same level. In the ancient Near East, to eat salt together was to enter a covenant of lasting loyalty. Salt, a precious preservative that kept food from decay, symbolized a pact that would likewise endure, resisting the corruption of time or forgetfulness. You were, in essence, promising to preserve the relationship. The ritual served brilliantly practical purposes as well. It transformed a dry negotiation into a social event, the Roman convivium, which literally means living together. This shared meal was a carefully staged arena for assessment. Over food and wine, you could observe a potential partner's temperament, their generosity, their restraint. Did they drink to excess and reveal a careless nature? Were they gracious to the servants? Every gesture was a data point. Furthermore, by offering hospitality, you demonstrated goodwill and investment. You were spending your resources to create comfort, signaling that you valued the relationship beyond the immediate transaction. And crucially, the meal created a shared, memorable experience. It was much harder to later deny an agreement made before witnesses during a feast that engaged all the senses, the taste of the food, the warmth of the fire, the sound of shared conversation. The memory of that evening itself became a kind of collateral. In this way, the shared meal performed a kind of social alchemy. It layered the heavy, personal obligations of hospitality and friendship directly atop the commercial promise. A deal was no longer just about goods and payment. It was now also about the respect shown at the table and the bond forged over salt and bread. This ritual acknowledged a deep human truth. We are far more likely to betray a faceless contract than we are to betray someone who has broken bread with us as a friend. But this intricate web of trust still needed interpreters. When a merchant from Venice met a trader from Cairo, their handshake meant nothing if they misunderstood the expectations behind it. This is where a new kind of figure stepped into the gap, the trusted third party. These were not lawyers or officials, but cultural translators, individuals whose unique position allowed them to bridge worlds. They were often bilingual scribes in a bustling port, or respected religious leaders whose moral authority crossed ethnic lines. A Jewish merchant in medieval Alexandria, for example, might rely on a leader within his own diaspora community to mediate a deal with a local Egyptian supplier, someone who understood both the intricacies of Talmudic commercial law and the customs of the Nile Delta. These mediators performed a subtle, vital magic. They translated more than words, they translated intent. They helped formulate agreements that honored the unspoken rules and sacred taboos of all parties involved, ensuring a deal felt honorable and therefore binding to everyone at the table. This concept scaled up to entire systems. In the great medieval trade fairs of Champagne, a truly international marketplace, no single king's law could govern all. Instead, the merchants themselves created their own justice, known as the law merchant. Disputes were settled not by royal judges, but by panels of experienced fellow traders. These merchant judges relied not on a fixed legal code, but on the customary practices of commerce itself, the unwritten rules of the fair that everyone in the tent knew and respected. Their authority came from their deep understanding of the trade and their shared interest in keeping the marketplace functioning smoothly for all. A ruling from these peers carried immense weight, for to defy it was to be cast out of the commercial community itself. Perhaps no group embodied this role more perfectly than the Sogdian traders of Central Asia. For centuries, these master intermediaries operated along the Silk Road, with a network of communities stretching from Samarkand to Chang'an. They were not just moving goods, they were moving culture and trust. A Sogdian merchant could explain the complexities of Chinese court etiquette to a Persian envoy, and just as easily convey the expectations of a Zoroastrian trading house to a Buddhist monastery. They became the essential glue between empires, trusted precisely because they belonged wholly to neither side, but to the road itself. Their endorsement of a deal lent it a credibility that no written contract from a distant, unknown capital could ever provide. They provided a living framework for understanding, turning the chaotic intersection of a dozen cultures into a place where a promise, even an unwritten one, could reliably stretch for thousands of miles. In their hands, the silent language of commerce finally found its most eloquent speakers. This entire invisible architecture of trust rested on one simple, powerful engine: reciprocity. Think of it as the golden rule of ancient commerce, the deep expectation that a favor, a fair price, or an act of good faith would eventually be returned. This was not about being nice, it was a brilliantly calculated strategy for survival and long-term profit. Anthropologists point to this principle as the very foundation of early economic systems, a kind of social mathematics where every positive action was an investment in a future return. A caravan master who shared his water in a crisis could call upon that debt for shelter in a future journey. A merchant who received generous credit during a lean season was culturally bound to offer favorable terms when his partner faced hardship later. This created invisible chains of obligation, linking families and businesses across years and even generations. The concept shines clearly in the Norse tradition of gift-giving, which was far more complex than simple generosity. A chieftain might bestow a valuable sword upon a warrior, or a trader might present a fine cloak to a potential ally. This was not a free present, it created a powerful reciprocal debt. The receiver was honor-bound to repay the gift, not with its exact value, but with loyalty, service, or a future favor of equal significance. This system of calculated generosity wove a tight web of mutual obligation that ensured ongoing trade, military support, and political alliance. It made commerce a repeated game played over a lifetime. In a single transaction, cheating might bring a quick profit, but in a game you play again and again with the same people, honesty becomes the only rational strategy. Short-term deception shattered the possibility of long-term gain, which was always far more valuable. A reliable partner who knew your needs and honored their word was worth 1,000 one-time bargains. This perspective transformed business from a series of isolated deals into the cultivation of a living network. Your success became intertwined with the success of those you traded with, fostering a profound, practical interdependence. The marketplace, therefore, was not a battlefield of winners and losers, but a garden where reciprocity was the water that made everything grow. The open ocean was the ultimate test of the unwritten code. Beyond the sight of land, a ship existed in a realm without borders, a sovereign speck of wood on a trackless expanse. Here, the king's law dissolved into the salt spray, and merchants, captains, and crews had to invent their own justice from the waves themselves. This gave rise to a complete, customary legal system known as Maritime Law, a body of rules so logical and necessary that it was respected from the Baltic to the Indian Ocean. Its foundational principle was one of radical shared destiny. When a storm threatened to sink a vessel, the captain might order a desperate act called jettison, the deliberate throwing of valuable cargo overboard to lighten the ship and save the whole. But whose loss was it? The answer was codified in a concept called general average. The loss was not borne by the unlucky merchant whose silks were sacrificed to the sea. Instead, all parties who benefited from the ship's survival, every merchant with cargo aboard and the ship's owner, shared the cost proportionally. This was fairness born of brutal necessity, a recognition that on the ocean, individual survival was inextricably linked to the survival of the collective enterprise. It made cooperation not just virtuous but mathematically logical. A ship's identity was its flag, and this was more than a symbol. The law of the flag meant that a vessel was considered a floating extension of its home port's customs and legal traditions. A Genos cog sailing off Anatolia was, in essence, a tiny piece of Genoa. This provided a crucial anchor of predictability. Disputes among the crew or contracts between the captain and merchants could be judged according to familiar home port rules, even in the middle of the Mediterranean. It created pockets of order in the chaos, yet this authority was balanced by deep-seated traditions that bound all seafarers, regardless of their flag. The duty to render aid to any vessel in distress was sacred. To sail past a foundering ship was an unthinkable breach of the mariner's code. For tomorrow, it could be you sending the distress signal. Similarly, the concept of neutral cargo was widely respected, a fragile attempt to separate commerce from the conflicts of kings on land. A captain known to plunder neutral traders might gain a temporary haul, but he would pay an eternal price. Enforcement came from the unique social fabric of the seafaring world. Ports from Alexandria to Antwerp formed a close-knit, mobile community where news traveled faster than the ships themselves. A captain's reputation was his most vital document, scrutinized by insurers, shipowners, and potential crew. The mechanisms were beautifully simple and devastatingly effective. A captain accused of abandoning allies in a storm or cheating his sailors of their pay would soon find himself facing a wall of silent refusal. No reputable insurer would underwrite his next voyage, seeing him as an unacceptable risk. Skilled pilots and seasoned sailors who had their own networks of information would avoid signing onto his crew. Port authorities might suddenly become inflexible, imposing delays and burdensome inspections. This was not a legal sentence but a social and economic quarantine. He was isolated from the very ecosystem that made his profession possible. In this world of vast, lonely horizons, isolation was a fate worse than any fine. It meant the end of a career, stranding him on land forever. Thus, the harshness of the sea bred a uniquely rigorous code of honor, upheld not by police, but by the collective memory and mutual need of every person who dared to trade with the deep. Their court was the tavern by the dock, their jury was every other captain who had faced the same gale, and their verdict was delivered not with a gavel, but with a turned back and a closed ledger. The silent language of commerce needed a grammar everyone could understand. In the bustling heart of any ancient marketplace, the most critical conversation happened not with words but with weights. A merchant from Memphis might not speak a word of the language used in Ugarit, but he understood perfectly the heavy, solid certainty of a bronze weight placed on a scale. This was the foundation of every transaction, the point where abstract value became physical reality, yet there was no global authority to certify these tools. The remarkable uniformity of measures like the shekel or the talent emerged not from royal decree, but from a deep, practical consensus among traders themselves. In any given trading hub, a few respected merchants would become the unofficial keepers of the master weights, carefully preserved lumps of stone or metal that represented the true standard. Their shops or stalls became the community's bureau of standards, a place where anyone could come to verify that their own scales were true. This was a system built entirely on reputation, the keeper's credibility guaranteeing the integrity of the measure for everyone. The public scale in the marketplace was more than a tool, it was a theater of trust. When a merchant poured grain into one pan and placed certified weights in the other, he was performing an act of transparency for all to witness. The crowd around him was not just idle onlookers, they were the jury, verifying the fairness of the measure with their own eyes. This public ritual transformed a private agreement into a communal fact, making deception far more difficult and costly. If a dispute did arise, perhaps a buyer suspecting a seller's weight was light, the resolution was elegantly simple. Both parties would go to the keeper of the master weight. Their disputed weight would be placed on a scale against the trusted standard. The balance of the beams, or their failure to balance, delivered a verdict that was immediate, visible, and accepted by all. It was justice rendered by physics, mediated by communal trust. This organic standardization is a quiet triumph of human cooperation. No emperor commanded it, no parliament voted it into law. It emerged because every participant in the market shared a blindingly clear mutual interest. For trade to flow, everyone had to agree on what a pound of wool or a liter of oil actually meant. The system was self-correcting. A merchant using false weights would be quickly identified and ostracized, his business crumbling as trust evaporated. So these local standards, born of necessity and guarded by collective vigilance, became as solid and reliable as any law. They prove that when the incentive for coordination is woven directly into daily survival, people can build remarkably complex and fair systems from the ground up, one balanced scale at a time. The strongest contract was written in blood. Before formal guilds or corporate charters, the first and most resilient trade networks were simply families, extended across continents like a living map of trust. A father in Cairo would send a son to Venice, a brother to Tunis, and a cousin to Marseille. Each became a loyal outpost, a node in a commercial nervous system that pulsed with shared purpose and unbreakable obligation. This was not merely a business strategy, it was the leveraging of humanity's oldest bonds to solve its newest challenge, long-distance commerce. The cost of betrayal within such a network was unimaginable. To cheat a brother or a cousin was not just a breach of contract, it was a profound violation of kinship, inviting not a lawsuit, but a permanent, chilling exile from the entire family and community. Your name would be struck from letters, your children would find no partners, your legacy would be one of shame. The enforcement was internal, eternal, and far more terrifying than any fine. A stunning example of this system in action were the Maghrebi traders, a network of Jewish merchants who dominated the medieval Mediterranean from the 10th to the 12th centuries. Scattered from North Africa to Egypt, Sicily, and beyond, they were bound less by geography than by a dense web of familial and communal ties. A merchant in Fustat could ship a valuable cargo of indigo to Palermo with absolute confidence, because his agent there was not a faceless partner, but a known relative or a correligionist whose entire social and spiritual standing was collateral for the deal. Correspondence from this period reveals the language of this trust. Letters are filled with terms of endearment and familial responsibility, alongside meticulous business instructions. They shared everything: market intelligence about price fluctuations in Alexandria, warnings about unreliable ship captains, and letters of credit that moved like blood through the network's veins. This free flow of privileged information was their competitive advantage, a closed-loop internet centuries before the concept existed. These kinship networks functioned as the world's first multinational corporations. They pooled capital to fund risky ventures, spreading the financial burden across the family. They maintained a shared reputational bank, where one member's honest dealing in one port raised the credit and standing of all members everywhere. They even developed their own internal arbitration, with respected elders resolving disputes according to communal law, ensuring conflicts were settled quickly and quietly without exposing family business to outside courts. The system was beautifully adaptive. When a young family member was sent to a new city, he arrived not as a stranger, but as a representative of an established name. He carried with him the accumulated trust of his entire lineage, a form of social capital that opened doors no amount of silver could. In this world, your business partner was also your uncle, your nephew, or your son-in-law. The personal and the professional were inseparably fused, making every transaction a reaffirmation of kinship. This model shows us the ultimate evolution of the unwritten agreement. It did not need to be written because it was lived. It was woven into the daily fabric of relationship, duty, and identity. The family itself became the factory, the bank, the insurance firm, and the court, all operating on a single, powerful fuel: the unthinkable cost of breaking faith with your own blood. For a few glorious weeks each year, a muddy field in Champagne transformed into the beating heart of global commerce. This was no ordinary marketplace. It was a sovereign island in time, a temporary city-state governed by one thing alone: the needs of trade. Merchants from Flanders and Florence, from Genoa and Cologne, converged here under a shared banner of safe passage. Their guarantee was not a king's army, but something far more powerful: a collective promise. For the duration of the fair, the local count's laws receded, replaced by a living, breathing legal system born from the marketplace itself, the law merchant. In this bustling, polyglot tent city, a dispute between a German wool trader and an Italian silk merchant could not wait for a local court that spoke neither of their languages. Justice had to be swift, practical, and deeply knowledgeable, so it was delivered by a jury of their peers, fellow merchants, who understood the nuances of a bill of lading or the customary interest on a delayed payment. Their judgments were not based on the statutes of Champagne, but on the unwritten commercial customs respected from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. This was law by consensus, a code written in the shared experience of 1,000 transactions. The fair's authority rested entirely on its reputation for fairness. If word spread that verdicts were biased or that safe conduct was broken, the entire magnificent experiment would collapse. No merchant would risk the journey, so the community self-policed with fierce efficiency. A merchant found guilty of fraud or refusing to honor a jury's ruling faced immediate and total exclusion. His goods might be seized to compensate the wronged party, and he would be literally drummed out of the fairgrounds, his name blacklisted across the trading networks of Europe. This wasn't just punishment, it was a vital maintenance of the ecosystem. The fair became a spectacular laboratory for innovation. Here, under the pressure of immense volume and diversity, best practices evolved at a breathtaking pace. A clever contract clause invented by a Lombard banker to mitigate risk might be adopted by a dozen others by the fair's end. A new method of using a letter of credit to avoid carrying heavy coinage would spread from one merchant tent to the next. These were solutions forged in the crucible of real need, tested and refined by the very people who depended on them. The seasonal rhythm of the fairs created a natural cycle of refinement. A practice tried in the spring fair at Troyes would be discussed and adjusted throughout the summer, then formally adopted or discarded at the autumn fair in Provence. Through this relentless practical collaboration, the unwritten agreements of merchants crystallized into reliable standards. The fair proved a profound truth that commerce, when given the space and the incentive, is perfectly capable of generating its own sophisticated, adaptable, and widely respected framework for order. It demonstrated that law could emerge not from the top down, but from the ground up, woven from the threads of mutual interest and enforced by the most potent force of all, the collective desire for the market to endure. A bolt of silk, a carved ivory tusk, a chest of fragrant spices, these were never just presents. In the intricate dance of early commerce, a gift was a carefully coded message, a silent declaration of intent that could build a bridge or burn it before a single price was ever discussed. The act of giving was a language all its own, one that established the entire social and power framework for the trade to come. Imagine a merchant from a minor city-state arriving at the court of a powerful Egyptian official. He would not begin by haggling over linen prices. His first move was to present a gift, something rare and exquisite from his homeland, perhaps finely worked amber from the north or lapis lazuli from distant mountains. This lavish offering was not a bribe but a speech. It said, "I acknowledge your superior station. I come in respect, seeking the privilege of your favor." The gift created a debt, a subtle obligation on the part of the receiver to at least hear the merchant's proposal. It was an investment in access, using material wealth to purchase social capital. Conversely, when two trading houses of relatively equal stature met, the gift exchange became a delicate calibration of balance. They would present offerings of meticulously comparable value, a matching set of silver cups or textiles of equivalent fineness. This symmetrical exchange spoke a different message entirely. It whispered, "We see each other as peers. Let our relationship be one of mutual benefit, not patronage." It set the stage for a partnership, framing the upcoming negotiations as a discussion between equals rather than a supplicant pleading with a patron. The timing was also part of the vocabulary. A gift presented at the very outset set the hierarchical tone. A gift exchanged after terms were agreed upon sealed the pact, transforming a commercial deal into a personal bond. To refuse a gift, however, was the most eloquent and dangerous statement of all. It was a flat, public rejection of the relationship being offered. In the courts of ancient China or among the sophisticated polities of the pre-Columbian Americas, such a refusal could freeze trade talks permanently, interpreted as a profound insult to the giver's honor and status. The gift, therefore, performed a magic trick. It allowed all the difficult social positioning, the assessment of power and intent, to happen gracefully, without a single awkward word of negotiation. It established the rules of the game before the game officially began. By creating a framework of mutual obligation and respect, it smoothed the rough edges off the purely financial discussions that would follow. The marketplace was not just a site of exchange, it was a theater of social diplomacy where the first and most important transaction was always the unspoken one, written not in coin but in the thoughtful selection of a present. The most secure vault in the ancient world was not a fortress but a sanctuary. In the heart of cities like Babylon, the towering ziggurat was far more than a place of worship. It was the central economic engine. The Temple of Esagila, dedicated to the god Marduk, functioned as a divine warehouse, a certified bank, and a sacred notary all in one. Within its hallowed walls, priests safeguarded vast stores of grain, precious metals, and commodities deposited by merchants and landowners. These priestly administrators did not merely store wealth, they systematized it. They maintained the official, sanctified weights and measures against which all others in the marketplace were judged, stamping commercial transactions with an aura of celestial approval. To have your contract recorded in the temple's archives was to have it witnessed by the gods themselves, elevating a business agreement into a spiritual covenant. The psychological enforcement here was immense. To cheat on a deal negotiated within those sacred precincts was not just a crime against a person, it was a direct affront to the deity who presided over the space. A merchant might risk a lawsuit, but would he risk a curse, a divine displeasure that could blight his caravans and wither his fields? This fear created a powerful, internalized policeman, one that traveled with the merchant long after he left the temple gates. The sacred and the commercial were not separate spheres, they were woven into a single, reinforcing fabric of trust. This dynamic naturally drew trade routes like iron to a magnet. Pilgrims traveling to distant shrines for festivals or rituals required food, shelter, and offerings. Where people gather with a shared purpose, commerce inevitably blooms. The roads to Delphi in Greece or to the great temple at Karnak in Egypt became bustling arteries of exchange, with markets and way stations growing up to serve the faithful. These routes, sanctified by their destination, offered a measure of safety, as harming travelers on a pilgrim's path was considered a grave spiritual offense. Furthermore, the temple complexes at major crossroads became unique zones of neutrality. Even warring factions or rival merchant houses would often respect a truce within the boundaries of a sacred site. This transformed temples into the ancient world's first free trade zones, oases of predictable order where deals could be struck without fear of immediate political conflict. The Greeks formalized this concept with the Emporion, a designated trading port or enclave. These were almost always established under the protection of a nearby temple. An oath sworn in the shadow of Poseidon's sanctuary before a sea voyage, or within sight of Athena's temple before a partnership, carried a weight that a promise made in a tavern simply did not. It bound the swearer not only to his human partner but to the watchful god, inviting supernatural retribution for betrayal. This fusion solved a fundamental problem for early merchants. It provided a secure, neutral physical space for exchange, backed by a metaphysical guarantee of honesty. A trader arriving in a foreign city would head straight for the temple precinct, knowing it was the one place where the rules were clear, the measures were true, and the consequences for deceit reached into the heavens. In an uncertain world, the sacred space became commerce's most reliable anchor, offering a sanctuary where trust was not just hoped for, but divinely ordained. The most valuable cargo a merchant carried was often a secret. Beyond the silks and spices in their holds lay a deeper treasure, the proprietary knowledge of where those goods came from and how to reach them safely. This was the era's true intellectual property, guarded not by patents but by a powerful, unwritten code of silence. The specific mountain pass that avoided bandits, the hidden lagoon where rare spices grew, the complex technique for turning worm cocoons into shimmering cloth, these were trade secrets more precious than gold. To share such information recklessly was not just bad business, It was a profound betrayal of the entire commercial community that depended on that knowledge for its survival. The consequences for breaking this silence were severe and multifaceted. Within a tight-knit merchant family or guild, a leak could mean immediate and permanent ostracization. You would be cut off from the network of trust, credit, and partnership that made your livelihood possible. In more extreme cases, where a secret threatened the economic security of a city-state or a powerful trading league, the penalties could be far more grave, serving as a stark deterrent to anyone tempted to sell their community's advantage for personal gain. The Phoenicians, those master mariners of the ancient Mediterranean, perfected this art of secrecy. For centuries, they maintained a lucrative monopoly on the tin trade from mysterious sources in the Atlantic, possibly as far as Britain. They achieved this not through naval blockades, but through meticulous control of information. Their pilots kept sailing logs closely guarded, and tales were spread of sea monsters and impassable waters beyond the Pillars of Hercules to deter competitors. This deliberate cultivation of mystery allowed them to act as the indispensable middlemen, their knowledge itself becoming the primary commodity they sold. This dynamic transformed information into a direct tradable asset. Knowing something others did not was a form of capital that generated immense profit. It created natural monopolies where the value was not in the rarity of the good alone, but in the exclusive knowledge of its source. This, in turn, forged incredibly strong in-group loyalty. The shared burden of a great secret bound a merchant house or a guild together with chains of mutual dependence. Everyone within the circle was both a guardian and a beneficiary, their individual fortunes rising and falling with the group's ability to maintain its confidential edge. Trust here was not merely about honesty in a single transaction. It was about lifelong discretion. The Code of Silence demonstrates a fundamental shift in our understanding of early mercantile power. Control was not exerted solely over trade routes or market stalls, but over the very flow of knowledge. A successful trading network was, in essence, a carefully managed information network. It required rigorous internal policing and a culture where loyalty was continually reinforced by the shared prosperity that secrecy made possible. In a world without copyright offices, the most innovative business model was simply knowing something that no one else did, and having everyone in your circle understand that their survival depended on never, ever saying it aloud. But a code of silence could only scale so far. As trade routes multiplied and the volume of deals grew into a deafening roar, the sheer weight of commerce began to demand a new kind of clarity. The invisible web of trust, woven from oaths and reputation, needed a visible map. This was the pivotal moment when the unwritten agreements of the marketplace finally stepped into the light, etched into stone and bronze for all to see. It was not the invention of law, but its formal recognition. The most famous early example is the Code of Hammurabi, carved onto a towering stone stele in Babylon around 1750 before Common Era. Amidst its many decrees, we find specific clauses governing the practical realities of trade. One law details the terms for a shipping loan, a high-risk investment where a financier provided silver to a merchant for a voyage. If the ship was lost to storm or piracy, the merchant was cleared of the debt, a formalization of the ancient maritime principle that risk should be shared. Another clause holds a merchant responsible if he is negligent and goods are stolen from his caravanserai. These were not arbitrary commands from a distant king. Scholars note they read like a transcription of the customary practices that had already been working on the docks and caravan trails for generations. Hammurabi's code was, in essence, giving royal and divine sanction to the common sense of the bazaar, turning successful custom into sovereign law. Centuries later, the pragmatic Romans faced a similar scaling problem on a Mediterranean-wide scale. Their intricate civil law applied only to Roman citizens. but their bustling ports were filled with Greek, Egyptian, and Phoenician traders. To adjudicate disputes between these foreigners or between a Roman and a foreigner, the praetors developed the ius gentium, the law of nations. This was not a code passed by a senate, but a body of rulings built from the ground up, distilled from the commercial customs common to all the peoples trading in Roman waters. It focused on universal concepts of good faith, fair dealing, and the binding nature of consent, principles every merchant from Gaul to Arabia would have recognized from their own unwritten codes. This transition marked a profound shift. Enforcement moved gradually from the personal and communal, the turned back in the marketplace or the curse of a forgotten god, toward institutional and rule-based systems. A dispute could now be referenced against a fixed public text rather than the memory of elders. Yet, for all their permanence, these early written laws did not replace the old ways. They often simply captured their spirit. They legitimized practices that had already proven their worth in the relentless, real-world laboratory of commerce. The stone tablet and the praetor's edict became new tools, but the foundation they rested upon was still the ancient, hard-won understanding between strangers that for trade to flow, promises must be kept. Yet this invisible republic of trust could not escape the gaze of kings. Astute rulers watched the merchant caravans crisscross their lands, the ships heavy with wealth docking in their ports, and they saw not chaos but a system of incredible, self-sustaining power. They realized that this organic network, which functioned so well on its own promises, could be an unparalleled asset for the crown. So began a calculated embrace, a move to co-opt the very trust merchants had built for themselves. The method was deceptively simple, a piece of parchment. Rulers began issuing formal charters, granting specific merchant groups exclusive rights to trade certain goods, to hold markets, or to govern their own affairs in designated quarters of a city. These were not just permissions, they were guarantees. A charter came with the king's promise of safe passage through his lands, a powerful deterrent to bandits or rival lords who might prey on the caravans. Most importantly, it granted legal recognition to the merchant's own internal rules and judgments. The state was effectively lending its monopoly on force to enforce the private agreements of the marketplace. In return, the crown gained immense advantages. A predictable, flourishing trade meant a steady and substantial flow of tax revenue into the royal coffers. The far-reaching merchant networks became the state's eyes and ears, providing invaluable economic intelligence about distant markets, potential threats, and the movements of rivals. And of course, the crown gained privileged access to the luxury goods that symbolized power: silk for robes, spices for feasts, and precious metals for coinage. This symbiotic relationship transformed the dynamics completely. The unwritten agreements of the bazaar now had the formidable backing of swords and royal seals. A dispute settled by merchant judges could now be enforced by the sheriff if one party refused to comply. This added a new layer of security and scale, allowing trade to expand even further. But this partnership came with a hidden cost. The merchants had traded a measure of their hard-won autonomy for this protection. Their once private codes were now visible to, and could be manipulated by, the political powers of the day. A ruler facing a financial crisis might suddenly impose a new, crippling tax on the very guild he had chartered. A political dispute with a neighboring kingdom could see a merchant's assets seized, not because he broke faith, but because of his city's flag. The trust system became entangled with affairs of state, subject to winds it could not control. This tension is perfectly illustrated by the Hanseatic League, a vast network of merchant guilds across Northern Europe. The Hansa was a powerhouse built on mutual trust and common commercial law, but it did not operate in a vacuum. It skillfully negotiated complex treaties with princes and kings, securing extraordinary privileges, the right to set up autonomous trading posts called contours, to be exempt from local courts, and to have their goods pass toll-free. In essence, these treaties recognized the League's internal laws as sovereign within their own enclaves. This allowed the Hansa to function almost as a merchant republic, using its collective economic might as diplomatic leverage. Yet this very success made it a political player, drawing it into wars and alliances. Its trust-based network, designed for commerce, now had to navigate the treacherous waters of royal ambition and international conflict. The informal was being formalized, and in the process it was changing. This marks a pivotal turn in our story, the moment when the invisible architecture of merchant trust meets the visible, often heavy, hand of the state. It raises a timeless question: can a system born of free agreement retain its soul when it accepts the embrace of power? The principles that guided a caravan through the desert are now embedded in the algorithms that approve your mortgage. Our modern financial world, for all its digital complexity, is built upon the same foundational craving that haunted the early merchant: the need for certainty in an uncertain exchange. Consider the concept of credit, the lifeblood of global commerce. At its core, credit is not a mathematical formula, but a quantified reputation. Your credit score is a numerical translation of that ancient merchant standing in the bazaar, a modern-day wasta distilled into a 3-digit number. It answers the same primordial question a Phoenician trader would have asked: can this person be trusted to repay? This score determines your access to capital, just as a merchant's good name once determined whether a ship captain would carry his cargo on trust. The system is more vast and impersonal, but the underlying currency remains identical: proven reliability. Even the instruments we use carry echoes of those dusty trade routes. The intricate letters of credit that finance international shipments today are direct descendants of the medieval bill of exchange, a paper promise that allowed a merchant in Genoa to pay a supplier in Bruges without risking a chest of gold on a perilous journey. It was a formalization of trust into a transferable document, a piece of paper that said, "My reputation backs this value." These tools show how the unwritten code was gradually codified, scaled, and woven into the fabric of global institutions. Yet the most fascinating evolution is happening now in the digital realm. Blockchain technology and smart contracts represent a bold attempt to solve the age-old problem of trust through pure, transparent mathematics. In essence, they are striving to create a digital version of the unbreakable clay bulla or the perfectly matched tessera hospitalis. A smart contract is a self-executing agreement, its terms written in code on a decentralized ledger that no single party can alter. It seeks to provide the absolute certainty that early merchants sought through sacred oaths and symbolic hostages, but it does so through cryptography and consensus instead of divine retribution. The goal is a trustless system where the need for faith in a person or institution is replaced by verifiable, immutable logic. This is not a rejection of the old ways, but their ultimate abstraction. The marketplace is no longer a physical space but a distributed network, and the guarantor is no longer a god or a king, but an incorruptible chain of data. This journey, from invoking Shamash over a clay tablet to deploying a smart contract on a blockchain, reveals a profound continuity. The core human challenge remains stubbornly constant. How do we create enough trust between strangers to enable cooperation and exchange? Our tools have evolved from ritual to writing, from ledgers to algorithms, but the essential quest is the same. We are still building those invisible bridges, still searching for a way to make a promise hold across distance, time, and human fallibility. The methods may change from century to century, but the marketplace, in its heart, still speaks that silent language of mutual need. The true power of an unwritten agreement lies not in ceremony, but in cognition. Beneath every handshake and sacred oath, a more fundamental mechanism was at work, a psychological contract silently forged in the minds of those early traders. This was an internal, shared understanding of what was fair, what was owed, and what could be expected, a set of beliefs that turned chaotic possibility into predictable partnership. Modern cognitive science helps us see this not as mere tradition, but as a brilliant mental adaptation. In a world of staggering complexity and risk, trust evolved as humanity's ultimate social shortcut. For a merchant evaluating a dozen potential partners in a noisy foreign port, he could not possibly investigate every claim or verify every weight. The cognitive load would be paralyzing. Instead, he relied on mental heuristics, simple, efficient rules of thumb honed by experience and culture. A familiar ritual like sharing salt signaled a predictable mindset. A strong reputation whispered by a money changer served as a condensed file of past behavior. The principle of reciprocity provided a clear forecast of future interaction. These shortcuts allowed for rapid, confident decision-making in an environment where hesitation could mean a missed opportunity or a fatal misstep. This cognitive framework delivered a profound economic advantage. It drastically reduced what we now call transaction costs. The endless, exhausting work of monitoring, enforcing, and verifying every single deal was minimized when both parties subscribed to the same mental rulebook. A shared belief in the binding power of an oath meant you did not need to post a guard on your shipped goods. A mutual understanding of fair measure meant you could trade without dismantling every scale. The marketplace became more efficient because the minds within it were aligned. This shared adoption of cognitive shortcuts did something remarkable. It began to sculpt a common trading personality across vast distances. A merchant from Carthage and a merchant from Petra, though they worshipped different gods and spoke different languages, could recognize in each other a similar calculus of risk, reward, and obligation. They could predict behavior because they shared a foundational psychology of exchange. This invisible alignment enabled cooperation that pure logic might reject, entrusting a fortune to a stranger based on the cut of his seal or the solemnity of his vow. It was a meeting of minds long before the meeting of goods. This intersection of ancient practice and modern psychology reveals a stunning truth. The greatest innovation of early commerce was not the ship or the scale, but a collective state of mind. By internalizing a code of trust, merchants built a cognitive network that was far more resilient than any physical road. They learned to navigate the wilderness of human uncertainty by creating mental maps they could all agree on, maps where a promise was a landmark, reputation was the terrain, and mutual benefit was the true north guiding every journey. A story told around a campfire could be as binding as any legal decree. In the flickering light, far from any court or temple, mythology and folklore became the primary textbooks of commercial ethics. These were not mere tales of adventure, they were sophisticated delivery systems for the unwritten code, packaging vital lessons about honesty, consequence, and prudence within unforgettable narratives. Consider the ancient Mesopotamian myth of the merchant who, lost in a storm, prays to the goddess Ishtar. He vows that if she guides him safely to port with his cargo intact, he will dedicate a generous portion of his profit to her temple. The goddess calms the seas, and the merchant, true to his word, makes the offering upon his return. His business subsequently flourishes. This story, repeated for generations, taught a clear, practical theology. The gods reward those who keep their vows, especially commercial ones. It presented divine favor not as arbitrary, but as a direct response to contractual integrity. Conversely, tales of merchants struck by misfortune after cheating a partner served as potent cautionary fables. They transformed abstract risks like a damaged reputation or lost future deals into vivid, visceral consequences: a sudden illness, a shipwreck, a lineage cursed with poverty. The lesson was unmistakable. Treachery might bring a fleeting profit, but it guaranteed a lasting, supernatural debt. These narratives provided a moral compass that functioned everywhere, from the royal highway to the deepest wilderness. A merchant alone on a dark trail would carry the memory of those stories, an internal guardian shaping his choices. This narrative reinforcement extended to the very practicalities of travel. Folklore about geography was a vital, pre-literate form of data sharing. A tale about a beautiful spirit luring travelers off a certain mountain path to their doom was, in essence, a vivid warning about a treacherous cliff or a bandit ambush spot. A story of a kindly old man who gave water to parched merchants at a specific rock formation encoded the location of a hidden spring. By wrapping survival information in memorable characters and plot, these stories ensured critical knowledge was preserved and passed down accurately through generations. The information became culturally embedded, easier to recall than a dry list of coordinates. The shared cultural backdrop created by these myths and fables was perhaps their most powerful effect. When merchants from different regions gathered, they often found common ground in archetypal stories. The clever fox outwitting the greedy wolf in European fables echoed the cunning merchant avoiding a corrupt official in tales from the Silk Road. This shared narrative language helped build a pan-cultural understanding of what constituted fair play and clever strategy. It made the unwritten rules feel less like arbitrary local customs and more like natural, timeless truths, as fundamental as the seasons. The code was no longer just a set of practices. It was the way the world itself was said to work, a universe where honesty attracted divine blessing and deceit invited cosmic correction. In this way, mythology and folklore performed a quiet, profound alchemy. They transformed the practical necessities of commerce, be honest, keep your word, share crucial information, into sacred principles woven into the identity of a trader. A merchant was not just someone who moved goods. He was a character in an ancient, ongoing story where his choices carried weight in both this world and the next. His ledger was not merely a financial record. It was a chapter in a grand moral epic written by the collective memory of every marketplace that had ever existed. Yet for all its ingenuity, this invisible republic of trust had its breaking point. The system was resilient but not invincible. It thrived on predictability, on the repeated rhythm of caravans meeting season after season, and on a shared belief that cooperation was more valuable than conflict. When that foundation of stability shattered, so too could the bonds between merchants. Times of extreme hardship tested the code to its limits. In a city gripped by famine, the sight of a foreign merchant's ship laden with grain could shift from a blessing to a provocation. The very community that once welcomed the trader as a bearer of goods might now view him with suspicion or outright hostility, seeing his stores not as commerce but as hoarding. In the absence of a neutral authority, a merchant group could easily become a target, their hard-earned trust erased by the primal panic of scarcity. The delicate balance of power was another critical vulnerability. When two rival trading networks of roughly equal strength clashed over a lucrative route or a disputed debt, there was no supreme court to adjudicate. The unwritten code relied on mutual deterrence, the understanding that the cost of betrayal was higher than the reward. But if one side believed it could win decisively, or if honor was perceived to be irreparably wounded, that deterrent evaporated. Disputes could spiral from heated arguments in the marketplace into full-blown feuds, with caravans ambushed and agents threatened. In the Mediterranean, such breakdowns often escalated to the sea itself, where a disgruntled merchant with a few ships might turn to piracy, preying on the very trade lanes he once traveled. The most dramatic demonstration of this fragility came with the slow unraveling of the Roman Empire in the West. For centuries, Roman power and the Ius Gentium had provided a vast, relatively stable backdrop for Mediterranean commerce. As that central authority crumbled, the political shockwaves radiated through every port and warehouse. Secure sea lanes became hazardous, standardized currencies dissolved into a patchwork of local coinages, and the grand networks that moved Egyptian grain to Rome or Spanish olive oil to Gaul began to fray and then snap. The shared reality that made unwritten agreements possible, a world where a contract in Carthage could be reasonably enforced in Naples, simply ceased to exist. Merchants retreated into smaller, more defensive circles of trust, and long-distance trade contracted dramatically. These moments of failure are not a critique of the system, but a crucial revelation of its nature. They show that trust-based commerce was a brilliant adaptation to a specific environment, one of manageable risk and ongoing relationships. It was a social organism that needed certain conditions to live: stability, repeated interaction, and a shared interest in the future. When famine, war, or political collapse destroyed those conditions, the organism could wither. The silent language of the marketplace required a minimum of order to be heard, and when the world descended into a roar of chaos, even the most solemn handshake could be drowned out. The unwritten code was a language spoken in countless dialects across the globe. Far from the Mediterranean, in the heart of the Aztec Empire, a unique class of merchants known as the Pochteca moved in near-total secrecy. These were not simple market traders, they were state-sanctioned commercial agents, spies, and diplomats rolled into one. Operating under the strict patronage of the god Yakatecutli, their journeys were acts of religious devotion. Their trade agreements were sealed in covert nighttime meetings, their caravans traveling hidden routes, and their wealth was kept deliberately unassuming to avoid drawing attention. This culture of secrecy was their primary asset. It protected not just their valuable trade routes to distant lands for exotic feathers, jade, and cocoa, but also the sensitive political intelligence they gathered for the Aztec rulers. For the Pochteca, trust was an absolute internal covenant, enforced by divine fear and the practical terror of exposure. To break faith within their closed guild was to invite spiritual ruin and the swift, severe justice of their own community. Their entire commercial existence demonstrated how a society could formalize the unwritten agreement, turning merchant trust into a tool of both economic expansion and imperial power. Half a world away, on the fringes of the Sahara as described by the ancient historian Herodotus, we find perhaps the purest distillation of trade based on mutual need. This was the silent trade, a method so simple it seems almost mythical. One group, perhaps gold miners from a West African kingdom, would approach a known trading location and lay out their goods, perhaps gold dust or ivory, on the ground. They would then retreat to a distance. The trading partners, often Berber merchants from the north, would then approach. If they found the offering acceptable, they would leave a pile of salt, cloth, or other goods they deemed equal in value, and they too would withdraw. The first group would return, and if satisfied, would take the offered goods, leaving the original items. If not, they would leave everything untouched, signaling the need for a better offer. The cycle would repeat until both sides were content, all without a single spoken word or face-to-face meeting. This was trust stripped to its bare essentials, an extreme barter system that eliminated the risks of language barriers, potential conflict, or deceit through sheer procedural distance. It proved that commerce could flourish on a shared, rational understanding of fairness, even in the absence of any shared culture or direct social bond. Across the vast Pacific, another system wove trade into the very fabric of society with elegant complexity. In the Trobriand Islands, the Kula Ring was a vast, ceremonial exchange cycle connecting hundreds of islands across archipelagos. Traders, often chiefs of high status, would embark on long, dangerous ocean voyages in ornate canoes, but they were not seeking profit in a conventional sense. The Kula exchange involved two types of ceremonial valuables: red shell disc necklaces called solava, which traveled clockwise around the islands, and white shell armbands called emwali, which moved counterclockwise. These items had no practical use and were never kept permanently. Their value lay entirely in the fame and prestige gained from possessing them briefly before passing them on to a trusted partner in the next link of the chain. A man's social standing was built on the quality and history of the kula, valuables he temporarily held, and the strength of the lifelong partnerships he forged through their exchange. This created a magnificent circle of obligation, friendship, and political alliance that facilitated all other forms of practical trade, like food and tools, which happened alongside the ceremonial exchange. The kula ring was commerce as social glue, where the unwritten agreement was a promise to keep the valuable moving, thereby keeping the entire network of human relationships alive and vibrant. From the secretive Pochteca to the silent Sahara traders and the ceremonial kula voyagers, these diverse systems reveal a constellation of universal human patterns. Each one, in its own way, employed ritual to transform simple exchange into a sacred or socially binding obligation. Each one placed immense weight on personal and collective reputation, knowing it was the bedrock of future access and success. And each one relied on trusted intermediaries or established protocols to bridge gaps of culture, language, and distance. This global perspective offers a profound insight. The drive to create systems of trust for commerce is not a cultural invention of one civilization, it is a shared human trait. It emerges independently wherever people need to exchange value across a gap of uncertainty. Whether through divine oaths, silent barter, or ceremonial gift cycles, our ancestors repeatedly discovered the same fundamental truth. For cooperation to span beyond the immediate family or tribe, it required a code, a set of promises that everyone believed would be kept. The marketplace, in all its glorious forms, has always been a theater for this most human of dramas, the ongoing quest to build a bridge of trust strong enough to carry the weight of our collective ambitions. The warmth of shared bread could not always melt the cold calculus of power. For all its elegance, the invisible code of merchant trust was never a perfect shield for the weak. These informal systems, born of mutual need, often mirrored and magnified the inequalities of the societies they operated within. A wealthy merchant with a long-established name did not just have more goods, he held greater influence over the interpretation of the rules themselves. Custom was a flexible thing, and its meaning could bend in the hands of those with the loudest voice and the deepest pockets. An outsider arriving without the protection of kinship or a powerful patron moved through the marketplace on fragile ice, vulnerable to exploitation by those who understood how to manipulate unwritten norms to their advantage. The very rituals designed to build bonds could become tools of exclusion. The lavish gift expected to initiate trade with a local official might be impossible for a newcomer to afford, shutting him out before he even began. The line between a reciprocal offering among equals and a form of coercive tribute paid by the less powerful was often dangerously blurred, decided not by law but by the unspoken social standing of the giver and receiver. These networks thrived on in group loyalty, but that strength created a shadow, the deliberate or unconscious exclusion of those deemed outside the circle. Certain ethnic or religious groups might find themselves unable to access the best credit, the safest caravan partnerships, or the most favorable arbitration, not through any written statute, but through a quiet consensus that reserved those privileges for a trusted few. The poor, lacking the social capital to participate in the dance of gift exchange and reciprocal obligation, often remained on the margins of the system's protections, subject to the raw forces of the market without the buffer of community trust. The unwritten code provided a remarkable form of order, but it was an order that did not promise or often even seek equity. It was designed for stability among participants, not fairness for all. This enduring tension invites a sobering reflection. Any self-regulated system, from ancient caravan trails to modern digital platforms, carries this dual nature. It can foster incredible cooperation, resilience, and a sense of shared destiny, building communities that function with elegant efficiency. Yet, without conscious guardrails, that same system can silently calcify privilege, creating invisible barriers that are harder to challenge than any written law because they are disguised as tradition, as custom, as simply the way things are done. The trust that greased the wheels of commerce could also solidify the ruts of inequality. This is not a flaw of the past, but a timeless characteristic of human organization, a crucial lens through which to examine the informal economies and peer-to-peer networks of our own era, where reputation is once again a primary currency, and the lines between fair exchange and hidden exploitation are being redrawn in real time. A 5-star rating is the modern world's most powerful merchant seal. Scrolling through reviews on a marketplace app, you are participating in a ritual as old as the first bazaar gossip. That digital score is not just feedback, it is a quantified reputation, a direct translation of the ancient merchants standing into a number everyone can instantly understand. It answers the same timeless question: can this stranger be trusted? The platform itself has become the new Caravan, a digital gathering place where information flows not from the money changer's whisper, but from community forums and detailed user profiles. Warnings about a difficult client or praise for a reliable artisan spread at the speed of light, enforcing standards through a global, instantaneous feedback loop. This collective judgment is the engine of the digital marketplace, a self-policing mechanism that rewards good behavior and isolates the unreliable, echoing the swift ostracization a dishonest trader would face in a medieval fair. The rules governing these spaces are not handed down by a traditional government, but are created by the platforms themselves, a form of private law that dictates everything from dispute resolution to acceptable conduct. This platform law is the 21st century's law merchant, a set of customary rules born from the practical needs of the community it serves. When you agree to a site's terms of service, you are not just accepting legal jargon, you are entering into a digital version of the old merchant's pact, agreeing to abide by the customs of this particular trading square. The core challenges, however, remain hauntingly familiar. How do you build genuine trust when a transaction is just a click with no shared meal or handshake? How do you punish a bad actor who can simply create a new account? And how do you foster a sense of communal obligation in a space that feels anonymous and temporary? The answers emerging are ancient ones dressed in new code. Escrow services hold payment until both sides are satisfied, a digital version of the trusted third-party mediator. Verified identity badges mimic the authority of a guild seal. These systems reveal a profound continuity. We are not inventing new solutions to the problem of trust between strangers. We are rediscovering the architecture of the unwritten agreement, rebuilding its pillars of reputation, community enforcement, and customary law within the vast, invisible marketplace of the Internet. The medium has changed from dust and parchment to pixels and data, but the human need for a promise that holds fast has not moved an inch. The silent language of the marketplace is a dialect we never stopped speaking. Our journey through the dusty caravans and sacred temples reveals a truth that reshapes our view of history. Trade was never merely the movement of goods. It was the delicate, relentless work of weaving a fabric of human connection, thread by thread, strong enough to span continents and centuries. Those unwritten agreements, sealed by a hand over the heart or a broken piece of pottery, were not just social niceties. They were the invisible architecture, the load-bearing walls upon which civilizations quietly built their wealth and reach. Long before banks and courts, these pacts formed the first global operating system, a protocol for cooperation that ran on faith and foresight. They teach us something vital we often forget in a world of dense legal text. Trust is not a soft, abstract concept. It is a hard currency, perhaps the hardest one of all. It is minted through deliberate ritual, its value compounds with every honorable transaction, and its entire reserve is safeguarded by the collective memory of the community. The merchant who invoked a god's name or the traveler who shared his last waterskin were not being naive. They were engaging in a sophisticated form of social engineering, building a reliable future out of present promises. As we now navigate a world of digital contracts and algorithmic trust scores, these ancient principles echo with startling clarity. Our 5-star reviews are the new Caravan gossip, our platform terms of service are the new law merchant, and our digital escrow is the modern-day trusted temple. The tools have transformed, but the core human yearning has not moved an inch. At the heart of every transaction, from a bar of silver in Babylon to a crypto token today, lies the same fundamental need, a craving for predictability in an unpredictable world, a hope for fairness when power could tilt the scales, and a deep, enduring desire for genuine connection, even in a fleeting exchange. This exploration is an invitation to see the hidden bonds in your own daily exchanges. Look for the small rituals, the unspoken expectations, the weight of your own reputation in every deal you make. They are the living legacy of those first merchants who dared to trust a stranger, and in doing so, built the world we share. If this dive into the roots of trust resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the myths and mechanisms that quietly shape our lives. We would love to hear in the comments which ancient merchant practice, from the silent trade of the Sahara to the sacred Kula ring, do you find most